Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Carrington. Welcome to North Brooklyn Night School, our penultimate session. We in North Brooklyn have multiple semesters of the night school because we believe that not only do we have to be active socialists, we need to be smart socialists. So we come together in night school to examine kind of what it is we stand for, what our convictions are, to analyze the world as it exists, why the world is often not a world of that fits our morality, and how to change that world. And so we try to plug ourselves then into action in the ways that most shepherd the power of working class people, transform the world. So lovely to see everybody. This is our session on mass incarceration, and I'm very, very excited to introduce our speakers for the evening at our night school. Some of them need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyways. First of all, let me introduce, again, with the need no introduction thing, our North Brooklyn state socialist senator, lots of alliteration there, Julia Salazar. And many of you may well have knocked on doors for one of her campaigns. As you know, Julia was elected in 2018. First, she was recently made chair, you may not know, she was recently made chair of the crime committee and played a key role in getting the HALT Solitary Confinement Bill passed, ending prison torture, or ending the most torturous part of a general torturous system. She comes to North Brooklyn today to speak about mass incarceration, and we're so honored to have her here. She's going to be in conversation with a couple of other guests. First, I want to introduce Jose Saldana. Jose is the director of the Release Aging People in Prison campaign, RAPP, a collective founded by formerly incarcerated people with the vision of ending mass incarceration and promoting racial justice through the release of incarcerated older adults and those serving long prison sentences. Jose himself served 38 years in New York State prison. And finally, we have Jared Chausow. I apologize if I mispronounced. Okay, good. Jared Chassow, the Policy and Communications Director for the People's Campaign for Parole Justice and a member of the HALT Solitary campaign, successful HALT Solitary campaign. He previously worked on the policy team at Brooklyn Defender Services, where he supported efforts led by directly impacted people to win bail and discovery reform, family regulation system reforms, and free phone calls for people in New York City jails. So really exciting lineup we have here. They're gonna talk about our situation, the terrible situation with mass incarceration, where the legislative process is, where the movement is, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A thereafter. So I'm gonna hand it off to Jose, Julia, and Jared. Wow, all J's, by the way. So Jeremy appreciates that deeply. Go ahead.
And we are going to hand it over to our senator.
Thank you so much, Jose, and Jared and Jeremy, and all of you who have really taken the time to join us this evening. North Brooklyn DSA, of course, always has a special place in my heart, and I love having the opportunity to join you all, especially for some political education. I actually just, on that note, want to sort of place this all in the context of why we are all here as socialists to talk about mass incarceration. I think that it's likely that even if all of us were not in DSA and were not socialists, we would still be anti-racist. I think it's likely, right? And we would probably still recognize that mass incarceration is unethical and harmful. But I think the fact that incarceration in this country is embedded in racial capitalism, that is, I think, what makes us as socialists uniquely equipped and motivated to fight against mass incarceration. What do I mean when I say that mass incarceration is embedded in a system of racial capitalism? It's not a coincidence that the United States is the capitalist kingdom And the United States also has the highest incarceration rate in the entire world. Our country incarcerates more people per capita than any other country. There are states in the US that also, many states actually, that also incarcerate more people than other countries in the world as just states. And when I say racial capitalism in this context, I mean that capitalism subsists on an unequal distribution of wealth. Systemic inequality sustains capitalism, and racial discrimination in our society, particularly racism, is a mechanism of that systemic inequality in our society that upholds capitalism, right? So that's what we talk about when we talk about racial capitalism. And so within this context, we're talking about how to fight against mass incarceration. Also, the connection here is, as I think probably everyone here is acutely aware, that mass incarceration disproportionately impacts Black Americans. Also people of color in the United States, but truly there is just a wildly disproportionately high number of Black people who are incarcerated in jails and prisons across the country, everywhere. And I think some of you, it was included in the reading, this Prison Policy Institute report that actually demonstrates exactly how stark the racial disparity is in jails and prisons and correctional facilities. So the question is, what do we do about this? What can we do about this? And I think there are a lot of ways for us to fight against mass incarceration and racial capitalism. But I'll speak to, just my own experience and sort of expertise as a state legislator, and the way in which we can use policy to try to fight this. As Jeremy mentioned, I'm now the pretty new chair of the Crime Victims, Crime and Correction Committee. I was really delighted and honored that when I became the chair, the HALT campaign, folks who have been fighting to end long-term solitary confinement in New York State for about 8 years, approached me and said, we want you to be the lead sponsor of this bill that precedes my time in the Senate. And so, of course, I was thrilled to do that, hit the ground running on it, and we finally saw a victory and passed the bill this session. It's been maybe 6 weeks since we passed the bill, and the bill will be implemented, fully implemented in a little less than a year now. And what it means is that, to take a step back, in jails, prisons, detention centers across the state of New York, currently, a lot of people, thousands of people actually every year, are sentenced to solitary confinement, kept in a cell that is about, really the size of some people's closets, not a very big cell, with extremely limited, they could be in that cell for up to 23 hours a day, very limited out of cell time. It has, as you can imagine, a profoundly negative impact on people's mental health, their physical health as well. And it's just really harmful. And it's also counterintuitive if you prescribe to the idea that any form of incarceration should be seeking to rehabilitate. That is clearly not the intent or the impact of the use of solitary confinement. People are kept in solitary confinement. I'll allow Jose, as someone who has been incarcerated and has experienced this before, to speak more to this. but there are people in New York State who have been incarcerated, or rather who have been certainly incarcerated, but also have been kept in solitary for decades. It's just outrageous and inhumane. And what this bill would not actually, or this law now is not completely eliminating solitary confinement, unfortunately, although I think we all would like to see that. But it does strictly limit the use of solitary confinement. It protects certain people, refer to them as special populations, certain people like pregnant people, people over a certain age, right? Considered elders who are incarcerated, people under the age of, or rather 21 or younger, protects these people from ever having to be held in solitary confinement. And then for other people, it just limits it to a maximum of 15 consecutive days. And I can also talk about the details of the bill for anyone who's interested. But, you know, to wrap it up, or at least my piece here, the purpose, or rather the relationship between limiting solitary confinement and trying to address mass incarceration, right? Obviously, solitary confinement is something that happens while people are incarcerated. But so much, you know, there's a couple ways in which this is even relevant to our fight against mass incarceration. One thing to note is that when we fight against mass incarceration, we fight for a world in which we have completely disassembled this horrific retributive system. We have a lot of different ways of trying to fight it, right? One, which I'll certainly allow Jose and Jared to talk about, is parole justice. You know, the goal ideally is so that more people will be released from prison, right? And more quickly. Additionally, we are fighting for changes in sentencing, changes to the law so that people don't end up incarcerated in the first place. But we also have to fight for more humane conditions for the tens of thousands of New Yorkers and many more people in our country who are forced to endure these conditions, many of them for longer than I've been alive. So with that, I think I'll stop there for now. There's so much more that I could say about all of this, but I want to pass it over to Jose and Jared.
Thank you. And again, thanks for inviting RAP and the People's Campaign for Parole Justice into your space. I'm Jose Saldana. I'm formerly incarcerated. I did a little over 38 years in prison before I was released 3 years ago. And I want to just briefly speak about what mass incarceration is to us, to those who've languished in prison for years and decades, to our families and to our communities. Today, there are more people in New York State serving life sentences or virtual life sentences, 50 years and over, than at any period in the history of our state. Imagine that even as the prison overall population is being decreased, there are more people serving these type of sentences. And we always talking about now, mass incarceration has become very popular in our communities across the state, across the country. Everyone is talking about mass incarceration. But what this means is that you have grandmothers and grandfathers, fathers and mothers, sons, daughters, uncles, aunts, brothers, all serving long prison sentences across the state of New York 52 prisons in New York State, across the state, all serving these sentences at the same time. I personally have witnessed during my nearly 4 decades of incarceration, many fathers and sons in the same prison serving life sentences. So we have men and women languishing in prison 3, 4, and nearly 5 decades because they were given harsh sentence as a result of the racist policies of mass incarceration. Harsher sentence in the beginning, and then little opportunity for release at the end. And in between, we have a health and human crisis of people just getting old, sick, and dying. And the reality is that most of the people we're talking about are from Black and brown communities, and perhaps of equal or greater importance, from poor communities, communities that inherit perpetual poverty. So this is the face and the reality of what mass incarceration is. It fuels perpetual poverty to the highest degree. One of my mentors, a man who recognized that I have redeemable qualities, the first man to actually help me develop the consciousness that I have today. He went before the parole board maybe 7, 8 months ago. He was 73 years old, had languished in prison already for 48 years, appearing before his 14th parole board. And during the hearing, he asked to be excused, go to the bathroom. He never returned. He had a massive stroke. This man was a brilliant educator, a mentor to an entire generation of younger people. He died in prison. He could have been a treasure in our communities. Val Gator, the longest serving woman in New York State prison, was 61 years old. She was misdiagnosed and died of cancer after being incarcerated for 41 years. She was an iconic human being at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women. She also is credited. Every woman that I've run into since I've been out for three years and change attribute their transformation to Val Gator. Helped an entire generation of younger women transform their life. What a valuable jewel she would have been in her community had she been released. But this, what we're talking about, the fundamental pillar of mass incarceration, perpetual permanent punishment. Because justice has been defined as perpetual punishment, or worse, vengeance. When Stalin died, it was reported in the paper that the PBA, Police Benevolent Association president, said justice was served. How could justice be served when a great human being who has helped so many people become better human beings? How is this justice? But this is our task. Those of us who are here, those of us who have willingly accepted the responsibility of transforming this society, is to redefine justice. Redefine justice for everyone. And we should not settle for vengeance as justice. We should balance justice with the value of human transformation, redemption, and value the dignity of incarcerated people. And I'll end with this. Over the decades that I've been incarcerated, men who taught me and men who I taught, we've developed the most effective therapeutic programs in the history of New York State to address criminal thinking, behavior, and attitude. Because not a single program has been offered to us today, not 4 years, 40 decades ago, but today. Not a single program is offered to incarcerated men and women to help us develop insight into the harm that our behavior caused, the harm it inflicted on human beings. Not a single program is offered to us. But we develop this consciousness because we create the program ourselves. Now, I just want to add that our solution to this inhumane crisis, our solution to this crisis that's not only impacting incarcerated people and their families, but our entire communities is impacted by this crisis. It's through legislation. Through legislation that will be a first step toward ending or uprooting the legacy of racism in the criminal legal system of New York State. Jared will take you through some very important information toward that goal. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose, and thank you, Senator. So my name is Jared Chausow. I'm a Greenpoint resident, and excited to be with you. And thanks, as Jose said, for sharing your space with us. I do want to sort of help to just provide a little bit of context for what Jose shared, although I think it stands on its own. But first, I just want to introduce myself briefly. I was many years ago worked for a state legislator myself, a state senator who's no longer in office, who himself was interested in criminal justice reform, was interested in ending mass incarceration. It was not at all, a top priority for our office. It wasn't something that I would say we devoted the bulk of our energy to. And relatedly, it was something that we were almost never pressed on. There were no rallies outside our office. We didn't get phone banked. We didn't get protested. There wasn't as much social media then, but what was there, we didn't get, trashed on social media. Whatever we did because, frankly, the senator, had a personal interest in it. And eventually, I left that job, I moved on to some other things, and the more I learned about the system, the more in tune I became, listening, learning from people like Jose, and doing this sort of political education that we're all doing here. The more it sort of resonated with me and gnawed at me that so much of mass incarceration, and we'll talk a little more about this, is a state problem. It's a state by state problem, that we had so much power to do so much about it for so many people. And like I said, it just wasn't, it wasn't the top of the agenda at that time. And it was very clear why. And some of this, conversation is happening in the chat. It's race and class, it's stigma, it's marginalization. And so, part of the reason I went to work for, a big part of the reason I went to work for Brooklyn Defender Services, and now, on the policy team, and now working with the People's Campaign for Parole Justice, is to be a part of an effort that's now massively larger in creating that pressure and creating that demand. And I say that just to say that it's really exciting to me that this conversation is happening, that groups like North Brooklyn DSA exist, that DSAs across the city exist and are like kicking ass. I mean, getting people in office who are making our jobs in sort of direct legislative advocacy so much more powerful and effective. And you know, I'm hopeful that the folks on this call, you know, at the end will stay involved in, you know, in our campaign specifically, and in the fight more generally around dismantling mass incarceration, because it works. I'm like, and the senator can talk about this, and Jose can talk about this. The HALT campaign was an 8-year campaign. You know, I would love for the Parole campaign to be much shorter than that, and for, you know, all of our campaigns to sort of accordion and shrink as we build this power. But it really was organizing, led by directly impacted people, and putting pressure on power, and it works. So thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I've actually never done this before in my entire life, so I'm hopeful it works. Oh boy.
Is it not letting you, or?
It might not be letting me, but
You should. Do you see the green button down there?
yeah, you know what? I think I have to. Okay. I have to record content. I might just go without the share screen.
If you want to email it to me real quick, I can also share my screen.
Perfect. Actually, would you mind just putting your email in the chat and just share this Google Slides with you?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks so much. And thanks for your patience, everyone. I love the email address. Let me know when you get it.
Got it. Just give me 1 second. Ah, 1 second. Serial. See it?
Do.
Great. Let me just start the slideshow here. How do I do that? There we go. There we go.
Awesome. So here we are. Feel free to jump to the next one. So Jose, as you said, is the director of Release Aging People in Prison campaign. You heard a little bit about what we're specifically fighting for, parole release reform. It's a little bit different than some of the other kinds of parole reform you've heard about, but the important thing is that we are led by formerly incarcerated people challenging the racist punishment paradigm, the culture of retribution that the senator talked about. And with the People's Campaign for Parole Justice, we're fighting for 2 bills, the elder parole and fair and timely parole bills. And I'll talk a little bit more about them soon. Go ahead. So I just wanted to put some faces to the names. Jose talked about Mujahid Fareed, who's the co-founder of RAP. He went on, got 4 advanced degrees, and founded numerous programs to help prevent violence, and I think most saliently created the first peer counseling program to address the HIV/AIDS crisis behind bars. It's one that's been adopted in prisons across the country. He did all that before his minimum term of incarceration was up at 15 years, and still was denied release for another several decades. Go ahead. This is Valerie Gator. She was participating in the Puppies Behind Bars program at Bedford Hills. She's no longer with us because of this racist punishment system. Go ahead. And there's Sully, who Jose also talked about. So when we talk about mass incarceration, I think a lot of you know the sort of top line statistics. The US has about 5% of the world's population, 25% of the people who are incarcerated. And when we talk about it like that, we often think about mass incarceration as a national problem, and it is, to the extent, or in the sense that the United States does hold this unfortunate distinction of being the most carceral country on earth. But if you look at this sort of, the whole pie breakdown for prison policy initiative, you see that the breakdown shows that the majority of people who are incarcerated in state prisons, and after that are in local jails. In both cases, local jails are predominantly governed by state law, and people are there either pre-trial or serving short misdemeanor sentences, depending on where you are in the country, but for the most part, under state laws. And so in that sense, mass incarceration is predominantly a state system, a state problem. Of course, it's more complicated than that. I'm oversimplifying, but I think that's really meaningful because number one, we were joined by our state senator, Senator Salazar, who is helping leading this effort to dismantle the system. But number two, we have a lot of power over what our state does. We passed collectively the HALT Solitary Confinement Act. Probably about 10,000 people got involved in that fight over 8 years. Imagine what we could do. There's 19 million people in this state. Imagine what we could do with 100,000 people or 200,000. We could build power and change and pass laws at the state level. And I say that in part because I actually don't know how to change laws at the federal level. I think there are a lot of really smart, awesome people working on that. But I know we can win at the state level. I feel good about that. Go ahead. The next thing to remember is that mass incarceration is a historical anomaly. It hasn't always existed, and it is not an inevitability. It doesn't have to exist going forward. The prison population shot up, as folks probably know, in the beginning in the late 70s, 80s, and on through the 90s, and continued until about 2012. It's starting to level off and decrease slightly. In New York State, the prison population shot up around the same time to about 75,000. We're now down to about 33,000 people in state prison. Go ahead. We also know that mass incarceration is racist. And when I say that mass incarceration hasn't always been with us, I think people on this call know that what mass incarceration represents, it's the latest incarnation, maybe not even the latest, frankly, as others are coming up around us, including mass community supervision. But it's a manifestation of the racial caste system that has been in this country since the time of slavery and perhaps before. And that's reflected, that racial caste system is reflected in incarceration rates, where we see that among Black people, as recently as 2010, the rate is 2,306 out of every 100,000 people, about 5 times the rate for white people. I actually couldn't find the chart for this one, but if you look at the rise of mass incarceration, the incarceration rate for white people remained largely the same. Even as it skyrocketed for Black people and other people of color in this country. Go ahead. So Jose talked about some of the lives we've lost and what this system means. So what do we do about it? The number one thing we hear from people when we talk about mass incarceration at panel discussions and meetings and so on is, can we just ban private prisons? And along those lines, we so often hear, particularly at the federal level, lawmakers who, for what it's worth, just haven't been held accountable enough, haven't faced the kind of pressure that we're all putting on our state lawmakers, that we're going to ban private prisons. Biden just said this at a speech the other day when he was getting protested. I believe we should get rid of private prisons. And absolutely, we should abolish private prisons yesterday. There's research showing that there's increased rates of violence by staff in private prisons, increased use of solitary confinement. They're abhorrent and they should be abolished. But they only make up a small fraction. About 9% of the people who are incarcerated are in private prisons. In New York, I'm going to wait for it in the chat. Can anyone tell me what percentage of people in New York State prisons are held in a private prison? You can shout it out. You can go in the chat. Exactly. So you all know, 0%, right? So, okay, absolutely abolish private prisons, and that won't help us dismantle mass incarceration. I should step back and I say, when I'm talking about some of this stuff, it's all part of a system, and it's all part of a broader system, and everything from broken windows policing to private prisons, to capitalism and lack of healthcare and everything else is all part of dismantling mass incarceration. But zooming in a bit, it's a small piece of the pie. Can we go to the next slide? The second most common question is asked of us is, what if we released everyone locked up for low-level drug offenses? Again, absolutely something that should happen. It should have happened yesterday. And there are active campaigns around fully decriminalizing drug possession, drug sale. We know from examples in other countries that removing substance use from the criminal legal system saves lives. We know that drug law enforcement is inevitably racist in this country. We know that white people, for example, use drugs and sell drugs at this equal or greater rates than people of color, Black people and people of color, and are far less likely to be incarcerated for it. And still, we cannot dismantle mass incarceration just by releasing people locked up for low-level drug offenses. Can we go to the next slide? At the same time, when we talk about mass incarceration, it's important to remember we're not just talking about the 2.3 million people locked up. We're talking about all the people who are formerly incarcerated, who bear the scars of their incarceration. We're talking about 20 million people across the country who have a felony conviction, which is very likely to bar them from employment, housing, student loans, all the sort of essentials of life, and then fully 77 million across the country who have criminal record at all, including misdemeanor convictions. And beyond that, about a third of the people in this country have a immediate family member who has ever been to prison or jail. Let's go to the next slide. Zooming in on New York, we've got 52 state prisons across the state. Senator Salazar can correct me on this, but I believe we'll have 49 after 3 were just sort of expedited towards closure, with roughly 33,000 incarcerated people. The racial disparities generally mirror those of the federal system. About 50%, about half of them of people in prison are Black people, despite Black people making up about 14% of the state population. Latinx people make up about a quarter of incarcerated New Yorkers. Prisons in New York are totally unsafe, and conditions are atrocious. Jose and others can talk more about this. Someone put in the chat, Mario Cuomo built lots of these prisons. I believe actually more than half were built under the first Cuomo. So in 2016, the New York Times ran a front page investigation finding a scourge of racial bias and brutality. I'm not going to go into too many of the details, but suffice to say that there's ample record of extreme racist violence by correction officers in New York State prisons. And this was nothing new to currently or formerly incarcerated people and their families. It did bring it to a wider audience, but a lot of what you'll read in the article, and I can send it around to folks, is a lot of what people were rising up against in the Attica uprising in 1971. This is not new. The only thing that really is new in New York State prisons, except now we pass HALT once that goes into effect, is that COVID dramatically worsened conditions for people inside. People were languishing in isolation for the better part of a year, denied access to programs, denied family visits, and more. So there have been some recent reforms. Some of you may have worked on them. There's different ways to sort of break apart the pie, but if you look at admissions or sort of front end and back end, front end, there were reforms to bail and discovery reform, impacting people, whether and when people go in, and people's ability to fight their cases. There were some rollbacks to that. There have been reductions in arrests, and some other legislation that is critically important. Senator Salazar was talking about the HALT Solitary Confinement Act, but still, we have 33,000 people in prison. We're having hopefully fewer and fewer people going in. But what do we do, as Jose said, with this crisis of aging and death behind bars? So even as the number of people in prison has gone down, the percentage who are older, people who are serving life sentences, in some cases life without parole sentences, has gone up. When we as a campaign talk about older people in prison, we talk about people who are 55 or older. And that's something that gets some pushback from lawmakers, many of whom are 56, 57, and they say, I'm not old. Maybe they aren't, maybe they don't feel old. I'm not going to tell them, about their health and what they feel. But in prisons, people age at an accelerated rate. And the commissioner of docs has determined that people are older once they reach 55. 55 in prison may be closer to 65, 75 in the community. In fact, the average age of death in New York State prisons is 58. And national research shows that incarcerated people age at an accelerated rate, and also can be released safely. The recidivism rates of rearrest for older adults are vanishingly small, something like 1 to 2%. We have this crisis of death. About 1,000 people have died in prisons under Governor Cuomo. Another 1,000 are essentially scheduled to die, sentenced to die in prison, because they're serving either life without parole or their minimum sentence is beyond their natural life expectancy. We have a prison nursing home in the North Country, close to the Canadian border in the Adirondacks. We have long-term care facilities. Senator Salazar visited one. People literally on their deathbeds in prison. That's perpetual punishment. And our state's spending a fortune, up to $240,000 annually on each older adult. Why does that matter? That's money that could be going to our communities, to communities that are impacted by mass incarceration, and actually, funding the resources that keep people safe, the housing, healthcare, including, substance use treatment, mental health care, and so on, that people actually need. Let's go to the next slide. So as I said, if you look at the prison population, this goes back to 2017. We're making some movement. So we're down now to 33,000 people in prison, but we still have about 9,000 people over 50, over 55 actually. So about double what the number of older adults in prison was in year 2000. And the majority continue to be Black and Latinx people. So I'm not going to go into too much of the details of I know we're short on time on determinate and indeterminate sentencing. I think we can jump to the next slide. So as I said, where are we here? We've got this crisis of aging and death. How do we get people free? Right now, there's a system called parole. There's a parole board. It's government appointees. They can have up to 19 commissioners. They're currently staffed at only 16. And people with indeterminate sentences go before the parole board and basically make their case. As we talked about, there are people who have totally transformed their lives, who have served very long sentences, who have saved lives, frankly, who are regularly denied by the parole board, no matter what they've done inside, based solely on their original conviction. There are many others, as I said, many people serving life without parole, for example. People are serving virtual life sentences where their minimum sentence may be longer than their natural life, who will never even get to the parole board, will never even have a chance to plead their case for release. So the People's Campaign for Parole Justice formed this year. The RAP campaign has been fighting for parole reform, the Parole Prep Project has been fighting for parole reform for a number of years. But really built out this People's Campaign for Parole Justice, backed by more than 300 groups across the state, with everyone from civil rights organizations to indivisible groups, to victim and survivor advocacy organizations, public health organizations, to sort of chart a path forward and help win that path. So the three main planks of what we're fighting for and what we're trying to get done this year. The elder parole bill says that anyone who's 55 or older, who's already served 15 consecutive years, gets a parole hearing, even if their minimum sentence is not up. This holds the hope of ending death by incarceration, of ending the despair that people behind bars have, where they have no hope of release no matter what they do. The second is a fair and timely parole bill. And that basically means that the parole board has to evaluate people based on who they are today, what they've done to change, and not simply based on their original crime, which may have happened 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years ago. And lastly, a fully staffed parole board, 19 commissioners, including people who share our values of redemption, transformation, and mercy. They may have professional backgrounds that show a capacity to evaluate people's rehabilitation. So we're asking folks on this call to take action. I know I saw from the chat there are a lot of folks from North Brooklyn, rightfully so, and on this Zoom. We have 2 state senators in North Brooklyn, Senator Salazar, who's with us, who's was a champion right from the start. And then we also have Senator Brian Kavanaugh, who's less of a champion, but I believe we can get him there. After a lot of advocacy by constituents, by directly impacted people, he's now officially supporting the fair and timely parole bill. He is listed as a co-sponsor of that bill. But he's been really stubborn on elder parole, making up all kinds of excuses. And so we need people on this Zoom to reach out to Senator Kavanaugh, particularly if you're a constituent, and tell him to co-sponsor the elder parole bill. It's S15A. And we actually have a tool. You can also go to forward.us, FWD, I'll put it in the chat. And you can, it's a click to call tool. You can contact your own state lawmakers and urge them to support it. I think we have one more slide. And the last thing is to be a part of our campaign. Join the campaign. We've got a website. I'll put that in the chat as well, with opportunities to get involved, stay involved, come out to some of our actions, and help apply some of the pressure I was talking about earlier to make sure our lawmakers, sorry for the background noise, hear us and listen to us and heed the people here. So I know that was a bit long, but I appreciate everyone's attention. Should not be a password. That's not good. And I'm looking forward to the remainder of the conversation, hearing some question and answer.
Thank you, all 3 of you, so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to pass the ball to Carrington to just introduce a few of our community norms for discussion, and then start us off on, I think Ashley's going to do Q&A.
Thank you, speakers, so much. And we're about to move to Q&A, but before then, just a few community agreements. One, just please keep in mind that everyone is here to learn, assume good intentions, and be comradely. Stack, if you have a question, please enter it in the chat like so. And you'll be called on in order. We do progressive stack, so people who have not spoken may be called ahead of you if you've spoken already. And please be brief with your questions. Keep it under 30 seconds. Keep context anecdotes to a minimum. We'll probably be going till 8:30, so I will hand this off to Ashley. Thanks.
Okay. As Carrington said, anyone who has a question, go ahead and type stack in the chat. Carrington, were you just giving an example, or do you have a question?
Just an example.
Okay. All right, then we'll start with Timothy.
Hey, thanks, guys. I wanted to ask you guys about how you see problems in framing the conversation around criminal justice reform, referring to like specifically nonviolent offenders and trying to sort of frame it as something that, I used to think drug policy was a really great vehicle towards the general goal of abolition. And I've been rethinking that recently as far as, this idea is framing it as like, we need to keep the people who are most wrongfully imprisoned in mind instead of focusing on the, general problem at large. Thanks.
I'd like to try to answer that question. First, let me just say that when I say we, I'm talking about incarcerated people who have become mentors to others, have been mentoring, have become mentors to others. And we try to develop strategies for empowerment. And we don't distinguish nonviolent from violent crimes. We believe all offenses harm people. It's just a matter of degrees. Every crime or offense harms someone. So we don't have that distinction, and we do not place greater value on a nonviolent, so-called nonviolent crime. And we definitely do not think that releasing people who have been convicted of so-called nonviolent crime is a solution to uprooting the racism that dominates this legal system. It's less than window dressing. If we are to solve this problem, and it is a race and a capital problem, beyond doubt, then we have to go to the root of this. And addressing it with just releasing nonviolent offenders is not a solution.
Okay. Next, we're going to have Carrington.
Hi again. So I'm wondering what role Cuomo has had in obstructing prison reform. I know in the chat people were saying that his father is responsible for building around half of all prisons, and his current weakened stature, has that had an impact on whether you all can get things moving that before were obstructed? I guess it's a question for Julia.
Yeah. And I'll also allow Jared and Jose to jump in if you'd like, since they spend a lot of time advocating for legislative changes. But I have found internally that within the legislature, in the conversations that we have to have, negotiations that we have to have with the governor's office, that it does seem to have at least some marginal impact in the past few months that the governor has been, in for the first time, for as long as Governor Cuomo has been governor, has been in a compromised position because of the allegations against him, because of the terrible things that he did with regard to concealing nursing home data. The list really goes on. And these behaviors of his finally being exposed, he's in a more vulnerable position. It's not everything, because the governor is, he's not the only obstacle to passing really transformative criminal legal reform legislation. But I found, I'll just give one example, which was in the negotiations over the HALT bill. So the HALT Solitary Confinement Bill, of course, existed for years, and the governor fought it for years. Most recently, a couple of years ago in 2019, HALT had enough co-sponsors overwhelmingly to pass through both houses of the legislature. And at the end of the legislative session, when it looked like HALT was going to pass, we were all very hopeful that it was finally going to pass. The governor struck a closed door deal with the leadership of the legislature, basically just the leader and the speaker, to agree to regulations instead of passing the bill. So the governor has, always used his power to fight against having to make any changes, any meaningful changes to the criminal legal system and fight against, our political agenda. But this time around in 2021, given the governor's compromised position, I found that we passed HALT for one, but finally, but also found that the governor seemed to understand in negotiations that he wasn't going to be able to get what he wanted, which was to completely gut the bill. That was, what he wanted to do. So I think it has had an impact.
Thank you. Next we have Martha.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to the speakers. I've learned a lot. I'm interested in hearing about how you see the fight against mass incarceration, the connection between that and the fight to defund the police and, demilitarize, abolish the police. Yeah, I'm just curious, how do we connect those in campaigns and, how do you guys see the connections? Thank you.
I'll start. Or Jose, do you want to begin?
Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll keep it brief because I want to hear from both of you. But the way I see it is that the police play a critical role in the carceral system, right? If it weren't for cops criminalizing our communities, then people wouldn't end up in jails and prisons in the first place. Thinking about also the work that we are doing to try to change this, and the justice roadmap, this platform that has many tenets and different pieces of legislation. It not only has legislation such as the elder parole bill, the fair and timely parole bill, sentencing related reforms, but additionally also includes legislation such as the MRTA, which recently became law to legalize recreational cannabis, marijuana in New York, but also includes proposals to end the criminalization of mental illness, right? Where the police are currently playing this role where if somebody calls the police, or rather if somebody calls 911 for someone in a mental health crisis, the police show up, and often an arrest is made or worse, or the police commit violence against the person. So at any rate, I think that these two issues are just inextricably linked.
Okay.
And
Absolutely.
sorry, just
may I just add to that, please?
Yes, please.
This, we're talking about a system like an octopus, and we all have to be involved in tearing this system down, dismantling this system down. So when we say defund the police, we talk about defund them until they no longer exist, and we come up with something that will serve and protect our communities, not people that will occasionally and all too often murder people in our communities.
Absolutely. Okay. Next we have Jeremy.
Oh, I actually think Doug was before me. He could go.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Great to hear from you all. The rise in shootings over the last year might have complicated the criminal justice reform agenda. Do you find any difference that people say, well, yeah, I like what you have to say, but this may not be the right time for it? How do you respond when people bring up the fact that we haven't seen this level of shootings in several years in New York City and other cities around the country? How do you explain what's happening, and how do you respond?
I'm happy to jump in, but I'm very curious what Jose and the senator would say. to your, I think your first question is a good one, and I would just say that none of us minimize harm, and none of us should ever minimize the harm that is done interpersonally or by the state, and that certainly includes shootings, murders, the stories we read about in the tabloids, the way tragedies are weaponized to fuel oppressive policies is abhorrent, but the underlying tragedies are very real. And so I don't think of them just as, how they, and I'm not saying you do either, but how they impact our policy reform efforts. But of course that, it is still a relevant question. And I think what's been really remarkable over the last year, unlike in even the year before, frankly, I'm curious if others do too, a much broader and a higher level of sophistication, I think, in the cultural conversation around this violence. We know that there have been some increases in, first of all, like crime data is a mess and it's in the hands of the police. But we know that there have been increases in violence around the country, in areas across the country, areas where there have been criminal justice reforms, areas where there haven't been. And whatever the police say or do to try to weaponize it for their political ends, we know it's just not true. But also, I would say, for me as a white person, one of the things I take away from the uprisings for racial justice across the country, led by predominantly Black young people, is that this system has to go. And to Jose's point, that we need a whole new system, a system that's actually there to serve and protect and not to kill people. Even if we don't know precisely what that system is and looks like and does, and that's true, I think, for policing, for prisons, for jails, that the current one is unacceptable and intolerable, that the racism, the brutality of the current system is unacceptable. And from my experience, I'm curious if others disagree, in the past where there would be, crime and violence would fluctuate based on a variety of factors in our society and our culture and government policy, that, advocacy efforts would perhaps get stymied. I don't feel it to the same degree now. I think there's a much higher level of sophistication where people know that, yes, there has been an increase of shootings in New York City and some other parts of the state, but no, enabling police violence, expanding the use of prisons and jails is not going to address it. But I'm curious what Jose and the senator think.
I just want to jump. I agree with you, Jared, but want to just speak to this sort of idea that we need, not that you were proposing this, Doug, but it is something that I think we have to confront. Like, I live in East New York, right? And we've seen some of the highest rates of gun violence in the entire city and in the state. And it's devastating. It's devastating for communities. The question is, I think there are a couple questions we have to ask and that we have a responsibility to address with policy. One is, what fuels crime? And we know that is poverty. Poverty fuels crime. And that doesn't just mean so-called quality of life crimes. That also means what people would consider to doubtlessly be violent crimes, gun violence as well. And so mass incarceration, policing, criminalization, it has not it's been tried, right? In fact, it's virtually always been tried in the United States, and it hasn't worked. It has not generally led to a reduction in gun violence. We not only have the highest rate of mass incarceration, in the world, but the United States has an extremely high rate of gun violence compared to other countries that you would consider the U.S. to be similar to, right? We have 8 times the rate of gun violence in the United States as Canada does, and all things treated equal. And so bottom line is, I don't think mass incarceration or incarceration at all, criminalization, it simply is not an effective response to gun violence, which is a very serious thing that is, of course, also disproportionately taking away the lives of Black and Brown New Yorkers.
let me say that, for us, when a parolee commits a very brutal crime, or any crime, someone is seriously harmed, the media sensationalizes this. And that one act overshadows the hundreds of people who were released and are doing exceptional, not only in their personal life, but a service to their communities. One act overshadows that, because that one act defines public safety, and it shouldn't. Public safety should be defined by the institutions in our communities. And if we define it that way, then we can begin to address the roots to all this type of wanton, indiscriminate violence that goes on across the country.
Hey, thank you, Senator Jared and Jose. Jeremy, you're up next.
Yeah, those were terrific answers. The whole presentation, terrific. The other thing I just thought about Doug's question was just like, I'm surprised people don't talk more about the fact that we've gone through like a world historical disintegration of society in the last year. Like, I'm honestly shocked there hasn't been much more crime than there in fact has been, because like, I mean, we know like atomization and lack of breeds, lack of empathy, and like these things seem kind of obvious, and it's kind of shocking to me that those aren't like, yeah, it's not kind of we should be grateful at how well our society is actually held together, in spite of how difficult the circumstances people have been going through and how much the government has largely abandoned people. But the thing I wanted to ask about, so I felt very optimistic after seeing Jared. I didn't know that number, the 26% decrease over time. That made me feel great. Like that was like, wow, a little progress. Holy moly. I was curious though, my sense is that in the past couple of years, there's been like some big advances or decent sized advances on mass incarceration reform, whether it's HALT or the Walking While Trans bill or marijuana legalization. But on the other hand, I know that there was a sort of like advance that got taken back, the bail reform. So I was just wondering a little bit like what we can learn from ultimately the failure to get significant bail reform, about kind of the coalition, popular sentiment, who the power players are in dialing down mass incarceration, and especially getting at sort of big ticket, big number items to decrease the prison population.
I worked on the bail reform campaign, so I can try to answer, but Jose and the Senator may have other better answers. It's a great question. So I think the most important answer is the answer to all questions of to me making change, including through legislative advocacy, and that's building power. The bail reform campaign took off like a rocket ship, not without a lot of work and leadership by directly impacted people, but really caught fire and won what was, of course, a compromise. All of these reforms are ultimately incremental and compromises, but was also transformative in a big way. Perhaps before we had the support on the ground to make that change last. And so it's the kind of issue where when you have a conversation with a person one-on-one, or even 1-on-40 as this is, you can really connect and come to understand why bail reform makes sense. But if the first time they're learning about it is on the evening news, where, as Jose alluded to, one event hyper sensationalized is presented to them as the sort of face of the reform, we lost a lot of support. That way. So I think the big lesson, the big takeaway is just the ground game. It's what DSA does, and it's what the RAP campaign does, and what HALT did is really going to talk. And folks did this for bail reform, but again, it's hard to talk through that in just a year or two with that kind of change. But talking directly to people, panels and community events, church basements pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, street corners around the state, and building the real popular support so that, not if, but when those stories appear about the one person who does one terrible thing appears, or two or three, that people have a sense for why it makes sense that thousands of people are now, I don't like to use the word benefited from criminal justice reform, but are being harmed less in meaningful ways, and why these reforms are ultimately about people's safety and not a threat to safety. The only other thing I want to say quickly is just like among friends here, a little bit behind the curtain, and some folks already may have done this, but in legislative advocacy, sometimes you're messaging things in ways that like cut against themselves. And so we very much needed to fight against the bail rollbacks. And while they could have been worse and we staved off some of the worst changes, the rollbacks themselves are terrible. But again, among friends, because maybe one day we'll fight to undo the rollbacks, we still have probably the best bail law in the country. It's still atrocious by like human rights standards, but we have categorical prohibitions on pretrial detention in a lot of cases that just doesn't exist in other parts of the country. So I wouldn't see bail reform as an abject failure, but I would see it for sure, to point your question, as a cause for learning lessons. And it's something that I take with me in this fight.
Okay, thank you, Jared. Next we have Joe Wesley.
Hi, I was trying to find the news article, but I couldn't track it down, that guards were finding workarounds around the HALT Act to essentially allow them to keep people in solitary, and in spite of the new law. And the question was, how do we make sure that the law is actually being followed?
Yeah, I'll start. So I should preface this by saying that we just passed the HALT Solitary Confinement Bill in March, and it's not actually going to be implemented until next April. There's a full year implementation period, and this is in part because of training requirements for the staff in correctional facilities. It's in part because of at least what DOCS, the state agency that operates all of these prisons and correctional facilities, they claim that they will need to actually do some capital repairs, some construction of new units in order to comply with the new law. So at least as of now, we can't really monitor the implementation in terms of the role of corrections officers. We are absolutely going to need to monitor the implementation. Part of that is sort of baked into the law through reporting requirements from the agency, from DOCS, citing how many people are being held in solitary confinement, for example, information about how long they're being held for. But beyond that, there are other ways that legislators we use right now, but that we'll need to be using in a more targeted way and more aggressively to monitor implementation. Public hearings. All legislators have the ability to visit correctional facilities, any correctional facility in the state at any time, unannounced, and it's something that I keep pushing for more legislators to do. It's really a tool that we have that can hold these facilities accountable when they know that not only can we show up at any time and demand to see everything on the inside, but that we will. So, I mean, that's just another way that we can kind of monitor the rollout of this once it actually begins, but we won't really get to do that until next spring.
Thank you. I'm gonna put myself on stack really quick. I'm curious for both the conversation of policing and prisons, what is, I guess, the most effective messaging for people of color who are actually terrified by the idea of easing up on sentencing and a more empathetic approach to prisons and policing? I know a lot of older people, at least in my family and where I'm from, that when I talk to them about this, it kind of scares them. So what's some of the most effective messaging for people who still need to see the more empathetic side?
We get that a lot. That's the reality. Unfortunately, you know, some of us, a lot of us, too many of us, have terrorized our communities. That's just a reality that we have to live with. This is why we develop these programs that will instill in us a moral obligation to repair harm. But we don't convince people in our communities of this overnight. But all over New York State, you see what is now called credible messengers, a concept that was developed in Greenhaven Correctional Facility, where I was released from. Credible messengers, the formerly incarcerated person who has transformed their lives, empower themselves so that they can help the community that they harm repair. And we see this all across the worst neighborhoods in our city. You see these men and women doing just that. We need more of them out here so that they can be recognized, so that people can feel comfortable with formerly incarcerated people, especially those who committed violent crimes. I don't tell people that I'm formerly incarcerated. I'll put a suit on and speak everywhere. And there are times where I just don't mention that I did 38 years, over 38 years in New York State prison system. And when I tell them that at the end, their jaws drop. And I look at them, I say, you see, I didn't eat nobody. None of y'all harm. In fact, we've developed a relationship, a humane relationship. There are literally thousands of men and women just like me, just looking for that opportunity to help repair the harm, not to create more harm.
That's amazing. Thank you, Jose. And our last question on Stack so far, we have Lee.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to ask a question about restoring the vote to the formerly incarcerated people. The figure of 77 million, which was in Jared's presentation, was startling. And, you know, we're generally across the country in a struggle to restore the vote and to keep the vote, particularly for Black and oppressed peoples. And this should be a big part of it, I think. I didn't see it in the list of things that you guys work on, but I'm sure it's there somewhere. But now is the moment to really broadcast that. So I'm wondering if people could speak to that. Thank you.
I'll start. First of all, Lee, thank you very much for that question. Right now, so for anyone who isn't aware of the existing law on this in New York State, people who are formerly incarcerated and have previously been convicted of a felony lose their right to vote when they're convicted, when they're incarcerated, and then actually under the law, their right to vote as it exists right now can't be restored. The only way that people who have been paroled in New York State can have their right to vote restored right now is through an executive order from the governor that was passed years ago. And so it's not ideal, right? We passed legislation through the state Senate and the Assembly very recently, like within the past, passed in the Senate earlier in the session. The Assembly just recently passed the bill that would allow anyone who has been released on parole in New York State to have their right to vote restored, regardless of what the offense was that they were convicted of, whether it was a felony or not. So that's a really major change. Personally, I don't think that anyone should ever lose their right to vote. And that means that while they are incarcerated, they should be able to vote. The only state, and I could be wrong about this, but I think this is correct, that the only state in the US where people who are currently incarcerated do not lose their right to vote is the state of Vermont. I have a bill, and I could be wrong about that. There may be another state where currently people who are incarcerated, regardless of the crime, can vote, but I think that's accurate. And if it isn't, then it's like the vast majority of states, and it certainly includes New York. People who are incarcerated cannot vote right now. I introduced and sponsor legislation that would allow incarcerated people to vote and prevent anyone from losing their right to vote solely because they are incarcerated. So that's, I don't know if it's part of the justice roadmap. It's, considering that we just passed this legislation to allow parolees to vote, it is a heavy lift. But I do think it's really important that we do this. There's just no justification for why someone should lose their right to vote. Oh, Maine as well. Got it. Thanks, Jared.
Okay, and that concludes the end of our stack. Thank you everyone for all the questions, and thank you to our amazing panel. We're going to move on to announcements with Jeremy.
Sorry, I was just typing something in the chat. I was just thinking back to Jared's point about how how little this has been a priority at times, and this, taking away people's right to vote is exactly part of that. I mean, of course, it's not legislators' priorities if the people most affected can't vote. Thank you so much to all our speakers, to Julia, to Jose, to Jared. I really appreciate it. Jared and Jose, if you just want to remind everybody about the asks you made. I saw Jared, you did in the chat, but you're welcome to speak up now. Then I'll just repeat it, no worries. That people should get involved in the campaign, parolejusticeNY.com, and also get on the phones to Brian Kavanaugh, especially if you're in his district. Thank you so much. I also wanted to make a few DSA action announcements, and then we'll do a little political education announcements. In terms of action announcements, a racial justice working group is kind of the home of our anti-mass incarceration activism. So people should sign up for the regular newsletter. They're doing canvassing, a big canvas this weekend for Brandon West as part of the defund campaign. You can find out more of what's going on there if you sign up for their newsletter. There's an Airtable link that should go in the chat. In terms of North Brooklyn branch of DSA, we are prioritizing and trying to get as many people as humanly possible out to support the city council campaign of Mike Hollingsworth, who is running on defunding the police, as well as on tenant rights and on public education reform and integration. It's a hard campaign. He needs every single person on this call to do some work. I've signed up for my weekly phone bank, m4bk.com, and please sign up for phone banks. North Brooklyn is doing Tuesday night phone banks and Saturday canvasses. If you can't make those times, don't worry, I'm doing Wednesday. Join me on Wednesday. Just do anytime you can. We only have 7 weeks left. I don't know, it's coming really soon. So now's the time to hit the doors and hit the phones. Finally, there's a lot of strike support work going on in New York City. People might know there's the Teamsters are out on strike in Queens, local 804, I believe. They have a link where you can also contribute to their Solidarity Fund if you can't make the picket line itself. They had 11 workers unjustly fired, including 2 pregnant workers who lost health care. Profound injustice, totally crazy. And also the NYU Graduate Student Union, my former union, GSOC, is out on strike at NYU. They would love to have people support them on their pickets from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. daily on weekdays. If you can't go and support the picket, there you can donate to the hardship fund if you're able. So those are action asks. Then in terms of political education coming up, we have our final night school session for the spring in 2 weeks with Quinn Slobodian, the author of Globalists, who's going to talk about is neoliberalism dead, or and what is it anyways? So it should be great. He's a really interesting author. Lots to discuss there. We have a second Jakarta Method picnic coming up to finish our reading of the Jakarta Method, which we started last week with our guest speaker. That's coming up on May the 29th. There you can sign up on Facebook and come out. We have pizza and talk about US mass murder. It's a thrill. And you know, if you want to get involved in polyed, feel free to send us an email. Finally, just join DSA if you're not a member. All are welcome. If you are not giving chapter dues currently, please do so. It allows us to do big campaigns like Tax the Rich and so many other things. And finally, tonight is the deadline for running as a delegate to our national convention. This is where leaders get together and talk about kind of what our national organization is doing and where we're going. So North Brooklyn members, more than welcome. Please feel free to sign up, but do it tonight, because otherwise you're not running as a delegate. Those are my announcements. Again, I want to extend such a huge amount of gratitude to Jose, Julia, and Jared. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And
Thank
have a
you.
good night, everybody.
Everyone, have a great night.
Appreciate
Good
it.
night.